Hello everybody, my name is Siali Foliaki and I'm a psychiatrist here at Capri Hospital. Welcome to the July podcast, and over the next 8 to 10 minutes what I'd like to do is share two interesting case studies, clients that were referred from general practitioners, and a couple of cases that I feel are worthwhile discussing. The first case I'd like to discuss, we'll use the pseudonym Fiona. So Fiona is a 54-year-old European woman who was referred to Capri by her general practitioner because of worsening anxiety, a marked increase in depressive symptoms, and also a marked increase in the amount of diazepam that the GP was having to use to manage her anxiety after concerns that the quetiapine that they were using was causing too much sedation. So this woman was otherwise well, but was being treated for hypothyroidism. So if I could just go through her medications, she was on estradiol. She was on 1 milligram once daily. She was on the serotonergic noradrenergic reuptake inhibitor, SNRI, mirtazapine. She was taking 45 milligrams at night. She was only charted diazepam as 2 milligram tablet per day, but she was using more than that, and there were repeat prescriptions having to be sent out from the general practitioner. She's on levothyroxine at 100 micrograms per day. She's also been on long-term zopiclone use, so she's taking 1 to 2 tablets at night, and that had been long-standing, many years. Some low-sec, recurrent headache she was getting, Topamax, Lipitor, and occasionally she was taking codeine phosphate at a dose of the 30 milligram tablet, and she was taking that just 1 tablet as required for treatment of migraine headaches. Now, the precipitating events that led to her hospitalization here in Capri was that her anxiety levels were increasing, and the general practitioner felt that quetiapine would be a good choice. Now, quetiapine, 25 milligram tablets, 2, 3, 4 times a day, often used for the treatment of quetiapine, for the treatment of anxiety, and that was, not an unreasonable thing to do. But the family were finding that she was too sedated during the day, and so put a lot of pressure on her and her general practitioner to stop the quetiapine. When they stopped the quetiapine, her anxiety levels went up, and without really sort of discussing whether or not she should take extra, she took more diazepam as a result of her anxiety levels going up without necessarily sort of communicating that to the GP. And it looks like, going through the GP records, that the number of scripts that were being given for the diazepam, it looks like the controls over the amount of diazepam wasn't perhaps as effective as as good as it could have been. So she came into hospital, and what we wanted to do was to try to reduce the anxiety. We thought that quetiapine was a reasonably good medication, and we couldn't quite figure out at the dose she was on why it was causing so much sedation. And the most important thing that came to the surface was she wasn't telling the GP, and she was probably in hospital for about 4 to 5 days before it came to our attention that the amount of codeine that she was taking was very high, and it wasn't codeine as prescribed by the GP. She was basically getting Panadine, and the amount of Panadine that she was taking wasn't being used for analgesic reasons. She was using it for the benefits that the opioid component of the Panadine was giving her. And then we put 2 and 2 together. The reason that the quetiapine was so sedating was she was taking that, and she was taking up to 180 milligram equivalents of codeine, but obviously taking that in the form of Panadine, so taking quite a lot of Panadine tablets. She wasn't telling this to her general practitioner, and it only came out to us as we sort of struggled to reduce the amount of diazepam she was on to try to use other methods of controlling her anxiety. So, this case is an example to us all how often over-the-counter medications are being taken by our clients, our patients, and that not necessarily being communicated to us. And the history that we finally got from Fiona was that she had been taking, what was considered reasonably high amounts of codeine via the Panadine for a period of 5 years. Now, the challenge with that is that creates structural changes in the brain that, to manage her anxiety and get her back to a non-anxious state. That's going to require quite a long-term process. But we were never going to get there unless it sort of came to light. So that particular case is a really good example of how often if we find a situation where anxiety is getting high, and our normal treatment medication for anxiety isn't really being able to get it under control, I think it's this type of case that makes us sort of, we need to be a little bit more suspicious that perhaps something like sort of over-the-counter medications are being used. So I thought that would be a really, really useful case to present to everybody. So that's the first case. The next case that I would like to discuss with you all is a 21-year-old young male who was referred to us by his general practitioner, and he came up from down the line, so he wasn't an Auckland-based young man. And the GP had been treating him for a severe anxiety condition. Very bright young man. And no matter what the GP did and tried various SSRIs and SNRI, tried some low-dose quetiapine, and still really couldn't get on top of this young man's anxiety. And the young man got eventually sort of the anxiety morphed into quite a sort of impulsive self-harm attempt, really. And at that point, he was referred into the public mental health system, but the family weren't overly happy with how he was being treated, I guess, cared for, and got referred through to us. And one of the really interesting things about this case is that because of this young man's brightness, he was able to hold a conversation with us that essentially detailed his anxiety, and it all kind of came together and made sense. And it took us a while to realize that actually below what appeared to be a really articulate young man, when you listen to the way he spoke, actually he was quite circumstantial. And what I mean by that was his speech, even though it was articulate, they were quite rambly in nature. And below the surface, when you listened hard to what he was saying, he wasn't actually saying much at all. And so what am I saying? He was actually thought disordered. But his thought disorder was masked by his brightness and his ability to kind of hold things together to make out like it was really just anxiety that he was talking about. Once we started to cotton on to the fact that he had low-grade sort of thought disorder, it became more and more apparent that what we were dealing with wasn't a high anxiety, but a low-grade psychosis. And even though the two clinical entities are quite different, actually severe anxiety and low-grade psychosis are really difficult to tease apart, because to be psychotic is very anxiety-provoking. And the more you explored his mental state, the more obvious it became that there was a degree of suspiciousness, sort of I don't know if you could say it was a paranoia, but there was a certain degree, his suspiciousness and guardedness was more than just anxiety. And eventually we diagnosed them with a low-grade psychosis. And the treatment of choice then was, quetiapine is not a particularly strong, doesn't have particularly strong antipsychotic properties until you get the dose up high. And what I mean by that is quetiapine starts to act like an antipsychotic at 300 milligrams plus. So in terms of what's valuable, I think, for general practitioners, is to know that quetiapine is a really effective agent for anxiety. And if you've got somebody who feels got severe anxiety and they're not responding well to an SSRI or to an SNRI, then getting the dose of quetiapine up, over 100, 150, 200 milligrams, that's a really safe and effective thing to do. And as long as you increase the dose incrementally, then you don't run into any problems with the orthostatic hypertension side effects of quetiapine. But really, if you make the diagnosis of a low-grade psychosis, at that point you need a slightly higher potency antipsychotic. And what we went for was low-dose aripiprazole. Now, aripiprazole, again, isn't the most potent antipsychotic. It's quite a gentle antipsychotic. And many general practitioners may not have actually heard of aripiprazole. Most would have. It's a fairly new antipsychotic. And that medication was transformational for this young man. And so, some insights into the way that his mental health problems had affected him. He was unable to complete first year at university. He was unable to sort of live independently, so he had to return home to his parents. Living with his parents couldn't understand, the fact that he had anxiety, why he still wasn't able to sort of socialize, look for part-time work, and he became quite isolated. And with once we got the diagnosis right and got the right treatment, low-dose aripiprazole. So, this young man now is attending Auckland University. He's got a girlfriend. He's living independently in his own unit. They've got an apartment in the city, and he attends university. He does karate regularly, goes for walks. He's looking for some part-time work. And the most recent exams, he was getting sort of C pluses, B minuses. And just feels so much better about himself and so much better about his prospects in the world. And I think that comes down to sort of being able to make that sort of diagnostic clarification between high levels of anxiety in a bright young man who was able to mask the fact that it really was, it had morphed into something more than just high levels of anxiety, that he was actually experiencing a low-grade psychosis. Now, the reason low-grade psychosis is really difficult to pick up, because florid psychosis, the presentation of madness, that's pretty obvious. And, you don't need medical training to pick up severe forms of psychosis. And I think the take-home message from this case is that if you've got severe anxiety in a young person that you just can't seem to get on top of it, do consider the fact that there might be, sort of a more low-grade psychosis going on. In conclusion, I'd like to thank you all for watching. I hope that you found our 2 case studies interesting and valuable. And if you do have any questions, just please reply to the email, put those questions down for us, and we'll do our best to incorporate answers to those questions in our August podcast. Look, thanks very much, and see you again.